Right, everybody, welcome back again to my channel. My name is Oluwaseun, and in today's video, I want us to talk about two services on AWS that you can use to deploy your front-end application. Now, the two services I'm talking about, I'm sure some of us have heard about it, and I'm sure some of us will be hearing maybe one of the services for the very first time. Now, there are two services on AWS that you can actually leverage to deploy your front-end application. Now, one strategy is to use S3 bucket with CloudFront. And CloudFront here is to basically expose the content of your bucket, which is the object you have in the bucket. The CloudFront can help you to expose that to the public internet while ensuring that your S3 bucket is private. Okay, so you're not exposing your S3 bucket publicly. Now, the second service that you can also leverage for your front-end application deployment on AWS is AWS Amplify. Right? AWS Amplify. Now, the question you may want to have on your mind is, what is the difference between the S3 CloudFront approach and AWS Amplify approach? Now, first of all, one thing that we must understand is that both of these approaches, if you are doing something related to CI/CD, you can use both approach, all right, as configuration in your pipeline. Right, it will work. Now, the difference primarily between the two of these is that AWS Amplify has what you call an inbuilt CI/CD. What that means is that you can connect your AWS Amplify to your Git repository or your GitLab, your GitOps, Bitbucket, and any repository, even AWS Code Commit. Okay, and then Amplify has the inbuilt ability to build your code and deploy it and make it accessible to your end users, which S3 cannot do for us, because with S3 you have to upload your code into the bucket and then you use CloudFront to expose it. That means for S3 you will have to build, all right, the code first, okay, and then deploy to your S3 bucket. But with Amplify, I can give Amplify the code, and then Amplify can build that code for me and then deploy it and make it accessible to my end user. So that's the difference primarily between the S3 plus CloudFront approach and then Amplify. Now, Amplify also uses CloudFront, all right, behind the scene, because your application is exposed by Amplify leveraging CloudFront, okay? Because it is built in to the AWS Amplify. All right, but we're going to look at these two approaches today and see how to leverage them, all right, to deploy a front-end application. All right, let's get into it. Now here, I have an S3 bucket that I've created already. And then here is my Amplify, all right, web page, okay, which we're going to be creating together. Now, in this bucket is empty. I don't have anything. So how do I get my code into this bucket? Now, locally, if I go here to my Visual Studio Code, I have a simple, school application that we're going to be leveraging. It's a front-end application that we're going to be leveraging. Now, if I want to push this to my S3 bucket, of course, it means that I must have configured the AWS CLI, right? And then I can interact with my AWS S3 using the CLI commands, okay? But the first thing I need to do is to build this application. Now, this is a JavaScript application. So that means I need to have NPM, I need to have Node.js installed on my system. So the first thing I would do is to say NPM install, okay? And then I do NPM install. So that would look through my package or JSON and build my front-end application for me. And then the next thing I will do here is to say npm run build, and then I'll press enter. Now, what that would do is to package the application, compress it, optimize it into, all right, a simple application that can be shipped, all right, to my S3 bucket or any other platform, right? So instead of uploading all of these packages, JSON and everything is bundled together into a very tiny application that can be uploaded whether to your S3 or to any platform to expose your front-end application. Is that okay? Now, if you look here, you have the build folder that was generated by the npm run build. If I expand this, I can see that I have the index.html, which contains just about one line because everything has been compressed, optimized for production. And then I see all of these, and then in static, I see the CSS and the JavaScript and all of that. Now, the next thing I want to do is this build folder is what I want to copy to my S3 bucket. Okay, so how do I do that? So I can come right here and say AWS S3, okay, and then I'll do what you call sync. So what am I syncing? I'm syncing the build folder. I'm going to say slash, which is I'm copying all the content of the build folder to my S3 bucket. So I'm going to come and say S3 column and then slash slash. I need the name of the bucket. So right here, I'm going to copy the name of the bucket, copy the name, and then put it right here, and then I'll press enter. So what that would do is that it's going to take the content of the build folder and upload that into my S3 bucket. So now if I come right here to refresh, I can see that my object has been uploaded, all right, successfully. Now, if I come here to permissions, I can see that this bucket is, the block all public access is on, and I don't have any bucket policy configured. So that means that this bucket is not accessible publicly, all right? And then that is where the CloudFront distribution comes into the picture. Now, in order to expose this front-end application or this front-end code that I just deployed into this S3 bucket, the next thing I need to do now is to create a CloudFront distribution that will serve as the target point or the endpoint for my front-end application. So instead of exposing the bucket publicly, I expose that through the CloudFront distribution. So I come here to distributions and I click and create distribution. Now, the name of my bucket is this. So I'm going to come here and then search for the name of that bucket, which is this one. Okay. And then right here, I'm going to select the origin access. So how do I want to access the origin? I'm going to select this origin access control. Now, the reason I'm going with origin access control is to ensure that my S3 bucket can only be accessed via CloudFront and not through any other means possible. Okay, that means by the time this distribution is created, CloudFront is going to create for me a policy that I would copy and paste in my S3 bucket policy. And that policy will ensure that access is only granted to my S3 bucket via the CloudFront distribution that I will be creating. All right. So I'm going to come here and say create the origin access control, and I will just say create. Okay. Now, if you look at the option that it gives me here, it says you must update the S3 bucket policy to allow this CloudFront distribution to serve the content of the bucket. All right. Now, if you scroll all the way down, of course, if you want to use HTTPS, which we will be using, you can actually come right here. If you scroll down a bit, we're not using WAF for now, so I'm going to say do not enable security protections. And right here, I can configure what we call an alternate domain. Okay, so that means I can come here and say add item, and then I can say that, I want to make these I can say app.teachdev.online. All right, that's the alternate domain I want. Now, if I come right here, I should have a certificate for these teachdev.online on AWS. On this channel, we have talked about how to generate a certificate, all right, on AWS ACM. So you can do well to check the videos that I'll be linking, all right, to this one to see how you can do that. So I'm going to select the certificate, and that will ensure that this distribution is only accessible through this URL, all right? And then I'll scroll all the way down. All right, and then here is asking me for the document root object. Now, it is optional, but it's advised that you put a document root because that will serve as the entry point to your application. Now, inside of this bucket, I already have this index.html. So I will come here and say the entry point, my document root is what? Index.html. So anybody that hits, all right, my website, all right, the alternate URL, okay, what will be served is this particular index.html. That means this file must be present already in my bucket. Okay, so I'll scroll down and then say create distribution. Now, once the distribution is created, all right, you can see that the alternate domain is this. And of course, the ASA certificate I'll be using is this one right here. And the bucket policy has been created. So I can just copy that, come to my bucket, go to permissions, and then I'll say edit, and I will paste the policy right here. Now, if you look at this policy, it's a simple policy that basically says that we are giving access to the CloudFront principal, all right, to get objects on this bucket. And then there's a condition, and the condition says that the only platform distribution that will be allowed to get object on this bucket is this particular ARN, which is the ARN of the CloudFront distribution that we just created, and which is the one that you have right here. Okay, so that means if I come now, all right, and okay, now wait, we have this teachdev.online. So that means I have to create a CNAME record for this. So I'll go to my domain here, which is this domain that I've created, all right, that I have here. I'm going to add a new record, and the record is going to be a CNAME, and I'm going to say app, all right, and the value, it's going to be the CloudFront distribution domain name. So I'm going to copy that and then come right here, and I'm going to pull that here. All right, now make sure you remove the HTTPS in front. All right, so you delete the HTTPS, just the values, and then you say save changes. So right now, if I come here now and I say app.teachdev.online and I press enter, I should be able to access my application. Now, the reason why it's not accessible just yet is perhaps because the CloudFront distribution is still in the creation phase. Okay, so we can allow that to do whatever it wants to do for now. And then, of course, we can check the name that this is app.teachdev.online. Okay, so I can come back here and refresh that. And if I look at what I have here, it says access denied, right? But then let's refresh that again. All right, now this is trying to use HTTP, and it is telling us that this is not secured. So, I mean, let's refresh that one more time. All right, and it's telling us that the connection is not secure. Now, one of the things that can lead to this is that let's look at the name teachdev, and let's look at the name that we have used here. All right, the name must correspond to what we have here. And if you look at what you have here also, it's still saying deploy. Now, it takes time for the CloudFront origin to, fully become available. All right, so sometimes that can also be the case. Okay, so this is app.teachdev.online, and I think that name is actually correct. So if I come back here now and I refresh it, it's still telling us that it's not correct. So let's do HTTPS, which should not be the case, and then let's press enter, and let's see what we have. Now it is picking up the correct certificate from AWS, all right, but then it is still telling us that it is what? Denied. So here, oops, I mean, look at what caused the issue. We have not applied the policy, okay? That is why we're getting the access denied, not because of the HTTPS, okay? So if I revert back to what we had, all right, teachdev.online, if I revert back to that, and of course, the policy has not been applied. So that's what we're getting is access denied. Okay, so let's save the changes now. All right, now once the change has been saved, if we refresh again, it should give us, what we want. So it was not because of the HTTP or HTTPS, it was because we've not applied the policy. So now I'm able to access my front-end application. Now, it means that if I want to update this front-end application, what I would do is that I will have to come here anytime there's an update to my front-end code. That means every time I will have to do npm, all right, run build every time, all right, to build the new update. And then once I do npm run build, that means I also have to run the AWS S3 sync in order to sync, all right, what is in my build directory with the S3 bucket. So that means every time I will do AWS S3, all right, sync build, okay, and then I'll put the S3 bucket URL. That would be what I would have to do every now and then. Now, if I'm also using a pipeline, that means I have to put all of these as part of the pipeline steps or stages. Okay, so that means if I'm deploying to S3, which means each time it will have to do the npm run build and then AWS S3 sync and all of that. Now, let's take a look at how Amplify is different from these process. Of course, the front end is up and running, and we can see that. But then let's look at how Amplify does its own. So I'm going to come here and say deploy app. So you go to AWS Amplify, you click on deploy app, and right here, it's giving us options. So we can connect to GitHub, to Bitbucket, code commit to GitLab, and we can also deploy without Git, which means your code can even be inside of an S3 bucket. All right, you can put all the code in an S3 bucket, but then let's leverage Git. So I'm going to say GitHub, that's where my code is, and then I'll say next. And of course, it's going to try to connect with my repo, all right, my GitHub repository. Now, the reason why this went was because I have connected it before with my own GitHub repository. So I've permitted Amplify in my GitHub repository already. So that explains why it didn't show me that, authentication page. So I'm going to come here and select the repository that I want. And the name of the repo is this one right here. So I'm going to select it. And I'm going to select the branch that contains my code. And this is the branch that contains the front-end code that we want Amplify to build for us. And I'm going to say next. Now, the name of the app, I can leave it as this, and then automatically Amplify would detect the framework that we have used to build the front-end application. And right here, it tells us that this is what? A React framework, which is true. And if you look at the front-end build command, it already generated the build command for us based on the framework that it detected inside of the repository. And that means it's going to do the run build for us. And of course, it's going to create a build directory for us automatically. So you can see the difference between the S3 plus CloudFront approach and using AWS Amplify, all right? And right here now, I'm going to say next, and I'm going to accept all of the defaults, all right? Now, Amplify is connecting to my repo, building the application, all right, which is a React application, and of course, it is deploying that application. Now, what we are going to do also with Amplify is that we need to also use a custom domain, similar to what we have here, which is app.teachdev.online. Because this URL, it's kind of arbitrary, but of course, it is something that is still a CloudFront endpoint that Amplify uses as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click and say add custom domain. So let's click on that. And I'm going to say add a domain. Now, initially, it will want you to leverage AWS, Route 53. But we're not using Route 53. We have our own, external domain provider, which is GoDaddy, that we want to use. So I'm going to come here and say, the name of it is, I'm going to say Amplify, all right, .teachdev.online. All right, and then I'm going to say, check domain availability. Of course, it's going to tell us that this domain is not a Route 53 domain, and that's fine. And I'm going to come here and say, I want to go with a manual configuration, right? I'm not using Route 53. And I'm going to say configure domain. Now, right here, I really don't need this one, all right? So I can actually just remove this path, okay? And then I can leave this one as is. All right, so this is amplify.teachdev.online. Okay, and I can actually just, let's remove that. So let's say exclude root. Okay, so we can leave this as is, and then I have a custom SSL that I want to use. So I'm going to select that. All right, and then I'm going to select that domain. Okay, and let's click on add domain. All right, so now it is going to try to configure the SSL. At the same time, it's also going to try to do the domain activation. Now, it takes time actually for Amplify to do all of these things, okay? But we're going to wait. I'm going to pause my video here, all right, and wait for Amplify to wrap up this SSL configuration, domain activation and all, and then I'll come back when, all right, everything is sorted. All right, welcome back, guys. So if you look at what we have here, it tells us clearly that the domain is now available. Okay, the domain is now available. So that means the custom domain now can be used to access our application. So let's go back to the main page. All right, let's try to refresh that and see what we have. All right, so it tells us the domain is available, but we can't see anything here because normally it should be somewhere here. Okay, so let's take a look at that. Custom domain is this. All right, and then if I go to actions, okay, all right, so let's go back and let's try out, now this is the URL that was generated. So if I click on that URL, it's showing our application, right? So, but that's not the URL we want to use. But then let's copy the URL. Let's go to the domain and let's add a new record. So let's call that a CNAME record, and we have Amplify. All right, and the value it's going to be that one. So I'm going to remove this, and of course you want to remove the HTTPS as well. And then let's save that. Now, if the custom domain was configured properly on Amplify, which I'm not too sure, but then let's come here now and then let's do Amplify. All right, .teach dev.online, and then let's press enter. Now you can see here it says 403, and that's more like a bad request. And it says we cannot connect to the server for the app at this time. All right, so that's more like a bad request. So that means the domain was not configured properly. All right, so let's go back again and let's re-add it. So I'm going to click on add. Okay, and then I'm going to come here. Okay, and let's look at domain configuration. Okay, maybe because we didn't add the root, so let's include that. All right, this is the root here means the repository. Okay, the branch that we want to connect to. So let's add that. Perhaps that was what caused the issue for us. All right, so it has been added now. Okay, so let's go back. Let's see. All right, so now it says add a custom domain has been added, and then you can see the name. All right here. So that was because we excluded the root, so it didn't know what to serve. So now if I refresh this now, all right, it should work now, right? So you can see that. So amplify.teachdev.online, it is working, and it says the connection now is secure. And of course, if we look at a certificate, it's still using the same certificate. So both applications are accessible. All right, this one is accessible through the CloudFront distribution with S3. This one is accessible through Amplify. Now, like I've told us already with the S3, we have to do the sync build every time. But the beauty of the Amplify is that if I make any change here, let's say that, let me see. Okay, so let's say that I just added, something like this here. All right, and then of course I push again to the Git repo. The beauty of Amplify is that the moment I push to this repository, you would see from here, it will tell us, it has detected a commit, and then it will build again and deploy. So I can come in and say git commit. All right, I can just say testing Amplify. All right, and then I would do git push. Now, once I push to that repository, it's going to come right here. All right, if you look at that, immediately Amplify says what? Deploy. So it detected the build, and of course, it will pick it up and then it deploys. So you can look at the commit message, testing Amplify. And that was exactly the commit message that we passed. So that way, I don't have to do, the S3 sync build, every now and then. All I need to do is I make a change to my code, I push it into Git, Amplify picks up the update, and then it builds the application again for me, all right, and makes the app available. So which means all I need to do is once the build is completed, I can come in and refresh my page, and I can access my new, all right, or the new version of my application. So that's the beauty of Amplify. Now, in terms of cost, all right, because if you look at the cost of using the S3 bucket, I'm sure it is going to be relatively cheap compared to using Amplify. So in terms of cost, Amplify might be a bit on the high side, because if you come in and look at AWS, all right, Amplify, so let's look at the cost. Let's look at pricing. So if you look at the pricing, all right, for AWS Amplify, it says here that with the free tier, it is free for 12 months. All right. And with that AWS free tier, you pay for what you use. All right. I mean, for here now, it's a build and deploy, no cost up to 1,000 builds per minute per month. So which means if you build up to 1,000, if you have up to 1,000 build, all right, you're going to be charged about 1 cent per minute. All right. And then for data storage and for CDN, you get charged 23 cents and all of that. So it's a bit pricey. All right. But then, of course, it gives you that CICD stuff. It detects the framework that you've used for your front end. It does the auto build for you. All right. And then anytime you push into the Git repo, it picks up the new commit and it does the build, all right, for you. Okay. And of course, the same way you can integrate your CloudFront, which you're using with S3 with WAF, you can also integrate Amplify with WAF, all right, as well. And that's about $15, all right, per month per Amplify app, all right, for the application that you're using on Amplify. So that's the difference between both of them, all right? But then with Amplify also can help you to connect with maybe like Cognito for user authentication and things like that, which you might not be able to use with the S3 and CloudFront, all right, approach. So thank you so much, guys. I believe that in this short video, we've learned something about how to deploy a front-end code on AWS using S3 plus CloudFront and leveraging Amplify's inbuilt CI/CD, all right, as well. So thank you so much, and I'll see you on the next one. Bye for now.